if you watch enough movies, then it's inevitable that you'll find a great movie friendship. And it really doesn't matter how old you are or when the movie came out, whether it's Timon and Pumbaa, Frodo and Sam, or Nemo and Dory. The point is that so many great movies and franchises have friendship as their heart. Now, it's been brought to my attention that some of those references are a little out of date for you guys. So, let's make this interactive. Wherever you are, go ahead and tell me what your favorite movie friendship is. Come on, just go ahead, shout it out. You can yell, don't do it the rest of the time, but right here, yell. It's not a rhetorical question. Tell me what it is. All right, awesome. Thank you for participating. Look, I don't mean to date myself, and obviously I couldn't hear your answers, but I am sure that I don't even know who some of those characters are. But that's okay, because you do. And the point is that whoever they are, they have an awesome friendship. But what happens when those friendships don't always turn out well? We see this in movies all the time too, where one person takes a trusted friendship and chooses betrayal instead. Just like there are a million famous movie friendships, there are just as many, if not more, famous movie betrayals. And one of those betrayals that hits me the hardest comes from one of my favorite franchises of all time, Star Wars. So specifically, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. In this installment, we see another pair of famous friends, Han Solo and Lando Calrissian. One of these days, I'm going to grow a mustache like this. Anyways, to make a long story short, Han and some of the other heroes are on the run from Darth Vader and the Empire, the bad guys, and they take refuge in a place called Cloud City, where Lando is in charge. He's kind of like the mayor. Now, everything seems like it's going according to plan until Han and the others are heading to what they think is a fancy dinner and find themselves face to face with Darth Vader instead. How? You guessed it, because Han's boy, Lando, made a deal and sold him out. Serious violation of the bro code. And when you watch the movie, this betrayal honestly comes out of nowhere and stays unresolved until the very end of the movie. And as much as betrayals like this pull on our heartstrings and make us wait anxiously, there's something about them in the stories that we read and watch that we love. We love the tension. We love the story leaving us in a state of limbo and making us wait to see the conclusion. When we know that somehow the story will reach a happy ending, in most cases, a betrayal is a lot easier to take. We love it until it's not on the page or on the screen. When it happens in our real lives, we don't love the tension. It eats us up. Instead of being exciting, the state of limbo is agonizing. And we don't want to wait for the ending. We want to know how it'll turn out right now. If you have relationships with people for long enough, eventually some kind of hurt or conflict will come along. Now, one disagreement isn't a reason to stop hanging out with someone, but some things can feel too painful to come back from. And some things can feel like a betrayal. Maybe a friend of yours said something negative or critical about you that hurt your feelings. Maybe someone you're close with let you down or chose other friends or interests over you. Or maybe you're not the person who got hurt. Maybe you did the hurting, and you don't know how the relationship can recover from what you did. In our relationships, there are things that could be done to us or that we could do to others that we think are deal breakers. Things we think we just can't come back from. And you might even wonder if that's true in your relationship with Jesus as well. What could we do in our relationship with God that would be difficult or even impossible to come back from? We're going to look at how Jesus answers that question today. And you might say that his response is a plot twist. Jesus' life here on earth was full of plot twists that shocked everyone. Well, everyone except Jesus. Now, sometimes Jesus was the cause of the twist, but there were times where other people were the cause of it too. One of the most well-known days of Jesus' life is what we now call Palm Sunday. It's the day that Jesus rode into the city of Jerusalem and was met by a huge, raucous crowd. But as was typically the case for Jesus, there was a kind of plot twist here, too. His entrance didn't go exactly how you would expect. As Jesus and the disciples approached Jerusalem, they came to the town of Bethphage on the Mount of Olives. Jesus sent two of them on ahead. Go into the village over there, he said. As soon as you enter it, you will see a donkey tied there with its colt beside it. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone asks what you are doing, just say the Lord needs them, and he will immediately let you take them. That's got to be nice. The two disciples did as Jesus commanded, then brought the donkey and the colt to him and threw their garments over the colt, and he sat on it. Most of the crowd spread their garments on the road ahead of him, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. That's where the name Palm Sunday comes from. Jesus was in the center of the procession, and the people all around him were shouting, "Praise God for the Son of David. Blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord." Praise God in the highest heaven. The entire city of Jerusalem was in an uproar as he entered. "Who is this?" they asked. And the crowds replied, "It's Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." On the surface, this might seem like a situation born completely out of circumstance. Jesus and his disciples are going into this town. They've been walking for a long time to get here, and Jesus' feet are tired. So they try to find an animal for him to ride, and the easiest one for them to get is a donkey. So donkey it is. Bam, let's go. But there's so much more to the story than it would appear. First, this was not just some random occurrence. It was written about thousands of years before Jesus was even born by the prophet Zechariah. He wrote, "Shout in triumph, O people of Jerusalem. Look, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and victorious, yet he is humble, riding on a donkey." Not only is the fact that this event was prophesied amazing, but it also shows us the significance of how this played out. When Jesus rode into town on a donkey, he was making a powerful statement. Instead of riding in on a huge horse decked out in armor or like a military commander or a ruler or something like that, Jesus arrived on the scene humbly. And this just made the crowd more excited to see Jesus. They had been captivated by his teachings, and they were ready to see him perform miracles and to celebrate him, which makes it even more shocking when this plot twists again. Because a few days later, that same crowd would be calling for Jesus to be killed. If you've ever watched a movie with a major plot twist, then it might seem like the twist comes out of nowhere, like the one I mentioned earlier. But if you go back and watch the movie again, knowing what's coming this time, then you'll be able to spot the clues that were happening all along. And this story is no different. Jesus' fate had been spoken about by prophets centuries before it actually came to pass. The religious leaders had been cooking up plots to trap Jesus for a while now, and by now, Jesus had told his followers a few times that this trip to Jerusalem would end with his death. That crowd turning on him wasn't the only betrayal Jesus would experience before his death. In fact, another betrayal would come from one of the people closest to him. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Just as he promised, Judas turns Jesus over for just a few pieces of silver. And this is just the beginning of a long night for Jesus. A night full of accusations, interrogations, beatings, and betrayals. Which brings us back to our crowd. Jesus goes on trial before a political leader named Pilate, who surprisingly decides he can't find any reason to have Jesus punished. But he gives the decision to the crowd. Pilate asked, "What should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" But the mob roared even louder, "Crucify him." Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere and that a riot was developing. So he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. The responsibility is yours. So Pilate turned Jesus over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. The very same crowd that shouted for Jesus and praised him shouted, crucify him, just a few days later. In less than a week, they went from worshiping him to demanding his execution instead. Now, this is shocking to us, but not to Jesus. Because as much as we've covered over the last few minutes, Jesus faced things like this throughout his life. I only mentioned a few of them here, but if you go read through Jesus' entire story, you'll see that he faced one plot twist after another, after another, after another. But that was especially true in the days just before his death. He saw strangers, his followers, and even his best friends turn their backs on him. And it would be totally understandable for Jesus to give up on people, stop caring about them, or even hate them. But he didn't. He chose to love them instead. By doing this, Jesus actually carried out the biggest plot twist in this story, in any story. Despite the fact that he faced unimaginable levels of betrayal, instead of doing the understandable thing, Jesus chose love and forgiveness instead. When people failed Jesus, betrayed him, and turned their backs on him, he could have changed his mind about them. He could have given up his entire mission to rescue us, but he didn't. Because even when we turn away from him, Jesus doesn't turn away from us. And that plot twist wasn't just true back then, it's true for us today. None of us turned our back on Jesus on the day of his trial. We weren't in the crowd that cheered for Jesus' death, but we've all had moments where we've turned away from Jesus. Or maybe we've never turned toward him in the first place. We might turn away from Jesus when we prioritize other things over our relationship with him, choose to ignore what he's told us, hurt someone he created and loves, or refuse to learn, change, or make things right when we mess up. And you might feel like that any one of those things is a deal breaker, like you can't come back from it. But that's exactly why Jesus came, to show us that with him, there's nothing we can do that will make him turn away from us. But maybe you do need to turn towards him. Maybe there's something you need to ask God to forgive you for. Or maybe you just need to set aside some time each day to remember the ways Jesus has already rescued, forgiven, and loved you. There's no mistake you can make, no harm you can cause, and no wrong you can do that Jesus isn't ready and willing to forgive. You will never live in a world where Jesus has turned away from you, no matter how many times you turn away from him. Because even when we turn away from him, Jesus doesn't turn away from us.